weeks ago, 1.5 actually, we had a conversation about a couple different topics, cognitive bias. We talked about social media, the impacts of how that affects our perceptions and how we can get into an echo chamber of our own thoughts. We talked about some of the Army's legal parameters and things that you as a soldier can and can't do, just at a high level. If you missed it, that was kind of a high level of what we talked about last time. And we're going to continue on the topic of dignity and respect. Can you go back a slide, sir? I'm not ready yet. So I had a homework assignment, and I'm curious, who actually did the homework assignment? Okay, so what do you guys think? You listen to the other side. What's the general consensus? Hated it. They're wrong. Okay. What else? Anybody have anything positive? Like, oh, I never thought of that. No? Okay. You guys are just stuck in your ways. Okay. No dopamine cookies for watching the other side, huh? The opposite of that. Okay. Well, so I had a couple other guest speakers lined up, and we had some changes and some things. So you're going to get me and Master Sergeant DeLewis, and we're going to talk about getting to belonging as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion topic. And I'm going to ask for some participation, most likely. Now you can go to the next slide, please. So one of the main purpose of this LDP is really, is to discuss how diversity, equity, and inclusion fit into the discussion around dignity and respect, right? We all come with biases and things and backgrounds and experiences, and this is a topic that's been around for a while, equal opportunity. It's kind of morphed, but what I think is the most interesting about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or if you want to call it diversity, inclusion, and equity, is that in the corporate world, it is a huge deal right now. And just to kind of lay the foundation, I had a call with my manager back home 2 weeks ago, and I just said, hey Christy, what's going on back home? What have I missed? Basically just kind of catching up. And she's like, well, one of the big things is corporate diversity. That's been huge since you've been gone. As a matter of fact, Urbandale, Iowa, the office we have there, got hit pretty hard because we're not diverse enough. She said, what's funny though is the fact that they're comparing Urbandale, Iowa to Norwood, Massachusetts, and Houston, Texas. So we're actually in the grand scheme of Des Moines, our office is actually more diverse than the general population of Iowa. But it doesn't matter because it's a talking point and it's a big deal with corporate social responsibility. So, gotta hitch in our giddy up. Yeehaw!
I also got a knife, sir.
Awesome. So. I think it's relevant. I think it's interesting, but it's going to come down, and we're going to have a conversation about how we can tackle this topic as a leadership team and kind of come away. For leaders, we have to make informed decisions. I think in order to do that, being inclusive, which is really where we want to get to, is kind of is bringing in and making your decision-making process all that much better. So seeing all sides of the problem will make better decisions. So that's kind of the lens I want you to think about this as we talk through a couple of these. Now I have a video I was going to try to show. I don't know if it's going to queue up here in a minute, but and then we're going to kind of go through some diversity, equity, inclusion slides, and then we're going to talk about some discussion topics, which I'd like some help with those, and then we'll talk about if you or somebody in your chain of command is a subject of discrimination, what's the complaint process look like? So we'll end with kind of the Army's process on it. So next slide. Okay, so just from these are the definitions. Diversity. When we talk about that, it's really all the attributes, experiences, cultures, characteristics, and backgrounds of the total force, which are reflective of the nation we serve and enable the Army to deploy, fight, and win. What makes us different and unique? And one of the things that's hot in the news cycle right now is identity politics. So I think diversity is an interesting segue into that, because how do you identify? I've got another slide that kind of talks about the puzzle pieces that make up what we talk about in terms of diversity. But some of this is how do you identify? And me personally, I'm obviously, I'm a Midwesterner, so I identify with Midwest. I'm a white male, 45, old, bald dudes. I'm with them. I'm also an American. you know, and I identify strongly with being an American. You know, I'm a soldier, you know, so it's think about all those little things. I'm also, you know, as I mentioned last time, I've got a little bit of, you know, Irish in me, and, you know, some of my cultural background in United Kingdom and Celtic, you know, so I identify a little bit with that. So just, you know, just think of that. Equity is the fair treatment, access, and opportunity, choice and advancement for all soldiers and civilians while striving to identify and encourage drivers and identify and eliminate, that's a long sentence, run on, but eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of the total force. So ensuring we are all on the equal ground and have equal opportunity. So regardless of position, you know, what's one of the big things that just came out here in the last, I think it was 2016, Chief DeGay sent me some information. What's kind of changed in the Army right now, making it more equitable for job positions? You can't answer, Chief. No DA photo? That's certainly one. What about MOSs and branches?
Open up combat arms.
Open what up to combat arms? Females, right. So that's, when I think of equity, that is kind of, females have an equal opportunity and access to a position. Now, when we talk about leaders, we also want to talk about positions within leadership. You know, do people that are from different, you know, gender or race, do they have the same opportunities to apply for the same positions and get selected for the same positions that everybody else is? So that's really what, you know, in terms of equity, what we're looking at. Ensuring that everybody has a fair opportunity regardless of where you come from. Now, when we talk about equity, we also got to put on the lens of the military. You know, we have certain requirements and responsibilities, and you know, if you have a physical disability, because that's, you know, that's a thing that makes you unique, you may not be able to apply for certain jobs. Okay, so there are certain constraints. Now, I think what the most important topic, you know, like I said, with this is really getting into the inclusion. It's the process of really you taking that lens and applying that filter and saying, you know what, regardless of, you know, how, the diversity of the individuals or whatever, I'm going to take in everybody's inputs into my process, and I'm going to integrate that perspective and ideas and contributions, because everybody comes from a different background. Nobody in here is the same. So being able to take that and then apply that is really the crux of what inclusion is about. So actively seeking to include those that differ into our organization. Okay, next slide. All right, just, you know, once again, I talk about, here's the Merriam-Webster definition of identity. You know, this distinguishing character or personality of an individual, individuality, the you know, relation established by psychological identification. So the question is, how do you identify? You know, that's you don't have to yell it out, but think about it. You know, think about how you identify, what makes you unique, and because this is the puzzle. You know, it's made up of a lot of things, and that's really what diversity is about, right? Does anybody have anything to add to this? Anything you don't see necessarily represented on there? I think sometimes we get stuck on what we think diversity is, but I think if you broaden your lens, diversity really comes down to, there's a lot of things that go into making an individual, and we are all diverse. How you identify, you know, may not be the same way that somebody perceives you. So, you know, communicating how, you know, the things that make you unique and individual, I think is important, because you might be African American, but, you know, you might identify, you know, as something, you know, maybe you're also got some Asian in you, and so you identify differently. So, but other people might not see that, and they might not understand that. So that's basically what, in a crux, what diversity is. Like I said, just got a few quick slides here to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. Right. Next slide. All right, demographics. All right, this I don't know if you can see this, but what's all this mean and doesn't matter? So I just picked some selective. Now you can do anything with statistics. You can make it go for you or against you. The whole point of this is not to, you know, point the finger or you know, really have a deep conversation in statistics and how the, you know, methodology was done on the analysis of this. But basically what I did was took 2019 census data off the site that's out there that published. You can go out and get this on your own. It's the census.gov site. U.S. Census data on the far left column. You know, the U.S. population is 328,000 or million, 239,000. Of that, 49% is male and 51% is female. Now that doesn't break it down into age category, right? So that, if you just look at gender, there's more females in the United States than there are males, okay? When you look at race classification, you've got white, 60% of that number, African American, or black is 12%, American Indian, Alaskan, Native 1%, Asian 6%, and then Hispanic or Latino is 18%. Now, on the far right, you'll see the data doesn't include people that say, I'm multi-race, okay? That's not included in here, so that's a difference, okay? So what I did then was take a look at Iowa, and then I took a look at, we got anybody from Maryland in here? Raise your hand, be proud. Just you two? Okay. Maryland, back there, Michigan? Okay, got a few folks. How about Texas? Just one from Texas? Are we sure? How many Texans we got in here? Okay, you live in Texas. Okay, there you go. All right. Okay. And then I also broke down, because I couldn't get this sliver down any differently in time for this survey, but active duty and reserves. And then I color coded it and I said, you know, based on the average for the United States, amberish yellow, puke, whatever yellow color that is, that's a downtrend from this census, meaning there's less representative percentage than the overall percentage. So it's kind of a dummy way of doing it. Green means there's an uptrend. So if you take a look at Iowa as an example, you know, we have 50% about, you know, there's slightly more females if you roll it out. But we're pretty equal on males and females. 85% Caucasian or white, okay? 4% African American or black, 1% Native American, 3% Asian, and 6% Hispanic or Latino. So you can see Iowa in general trends down from a diversity standpoint in the demographic data in a few categories except for white males, okay? Maryland, 48% male, more females in Maryland. Looks like, on paper anyway. 50% are white, 31%, which is a significant jump up in the average for black and African American. More Asians, 7%, and then downtrend slightly in Hispanic or Latino. Michigan, you can see the numbers there, fairly similar to Iowa in that there's more white. Now they do meet or exceed the average in terms of black or African American. Asian and Hispanic slightly lower at 3 and 5%. And then Texas, 50-50, male-female, 41% white. You can see which is actually significantly, well not significantly, but it's a much lower number in terms of white, higher population of black, much higher population of Hispanic or Latino, okay? So then if we look at, just based on that, what does that tell you? What's the data tell you? That's a question for you. Anyone?
Every state is different.
Good. Every state is different. Which drives what? What do we have to do to fill seats? Recruiting. So just in general terms, if you're an Iowan, you're much more likely to be white, okay, and less likely to be black or African American, Asian, or Hispanic. What about if you look at Texas? You know, if you're recruiting just from the state of Texas, what's that tell you? Much more likely to have Hispanic members join the military from Texas, right? I mean, there's no rocket science to this, but it does impact the diversity of every organization. Every state for the National Guard, active duty is a little different because you pull from the whole United States of America, so you're pulling different demographics. The active duty and reserve data I pulled from a 2018 Military OneSource report. That was about the most current thing I could find out there. And you'll see that 82% of active duty and reserves is male, 18% is female, and then you get into 71% white, 17% black or African American, and then you have a slight uptick, but it's not at the national average for Hispanic at 15% and 4%. So what does that tell you in terms of active duty and reserve compared to the U.S. demographic? Anyone? Are we more diverse, about the same, or generally? What don't we have that would make us more diverse, just in percentage-wise? Females. We only have 18% females when the population of the United States is 51%. So if you want to get after diversity, that's one area the Army could work on. And what has the Army done to work on that? Opened up MOSs, right? So I'm just kind of painting the picture for you in terms of where we're at. I think historically there's some changes that are occurring that are going to drive up some of the diversity, but that's going to take some changes in mindset, changes in a little bit of leadership focus, and some, some changes. It's well above Soltz's pay grade, but we look at things, and how can we, make an environment that's much more conducive to more females. African Americans are, based on this study, are fairly well representative, probably more Asians than Hispanics, if you really want to just look at raw numbers. But I'm not saying that's what diversity is. I'm just giving you the demographics, okay? That affects the recruiting and the, how we grow the force, okay? Any comments on that? Am I off base? Questions? This is a dialogue, sort of, so.
Just one thought I had about your slide before, sir, is when we look at the things that make us diverse, I would say...
You go back one.
I was just going to say that one thing I think about is the intersectionality of these different identities. So like the experience for a white male versus a black male, or white female versus... Just all this intersectionality then affects your experience too. It makes a difference on your experience.
Absolutely, yeah, and some of the opportunities, if you want to look at opportunities that maybe some have had that others haven't had, just based on social economic class or whatever. I'm not a social scientist, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but you can go out and YouTube that. Okay, next slide. Next. All right, so now we talk about equity. Okay, that's the middle one. Now, I just downloaded, there's a bunch of these pictures, kind of like this, just to level set though, kind of what we talk about in terms of equity, right? The first image is assume that everyone will benefit from the same sports. They are all being treated equally. They all got a box, right? They can, but the little dude on the right can't see over the box or see over the fence. So they say, well, let's get the little dude extra boxes so he can see over the fence. Okay, well that's good. But that's not really what we're talking about with equity. What we're talking about is the third image, where we remove some of the barriers that, and I don't have a good example in the military. Maybe one of you guys could help me out there, but, in terms of barriers that we could remove, one of the things I think was maybe the MOS barrier for females. I'm just trying to use that as an example because I don't have a good one that I can apply to the military lens, but basically that's where I kind of got the females, that's the XORD and kind of where we're at. And Chief sent me a couple things. We've got a couple female leaders in the Iowa National Guard right now. And in order to build a unit, the combat arms unit that has females in it, we got to start with the leadership. And that's kind of one of the impediments, or makes it a little bit harder to fill those organizations, because you got to start there and it takes a while to develop a leader, right? So, Chief, you got any comments on that? I appreciate you digging it out for me, but.
I think that's still kind of a barrier to the whole equity for the National Guard, because we're restricting the fact that we have to have a female in there, and we're still building it up. So it's a lot more difficult for us to gain a female in one of that's a qualified branch member to represent that population. So it's still a barrier that we need to overcome, but we're getting closer.
Yeah. And I honestly don't know. I know probably in my lifetime, or in my career in the military, probably won't see 50-50 male females. But it's going to grow over the course of the next few years. Okay. So any questions or comments on equity? That's really what we're talking about in terms of when you hear the term equity, we're talking about the ability to, everybody has level field. There's no barriers, and getting to that point. Okay. Next. All right, so here's where we want to get to. This is inclusion, and this is, I don't know, a wackadoodle slide thing I found, but inclusion, if you look at, on the left, the upper left, you have exclusion, which, everybody in the blue is in the middle, and you got some outliers. Well, then you go to integration, where you're bringing in the pockets of the you know, the different colors in there, but they're still all in their own little island in the middle. I don't know if you can see that. And then you got segregation. Well, we kick them out and they're on their own, and you're back to 2 balls. So what we want to get to is the inclusion, which is everybody's feels like they're freely able to communicate, exchange information, and they get to the point where thoughts, ideas, perspectives of all individuals matter, right? And then we get to the point in the middle when we bring all these together, we get this sense of belonging, and that's really, I think, where we want to get after. Because what are you more likely to do if you feel like you belong? Sorry, say again. Contribute. Yeah. What else?
Stick around.
Retention. Stick around. What else? Recruit more. Want to be a part of a team. Want to be along. Anything else?
I'd say you're more willing to take chances or take on leadership things if you feel like you're willing.
Yeah, you feel less risk or pressure. You know, maybe you feel like you can throw yourself out there more. You know, how do we become more inclusive in our decision-making process? What are some things that we can do to try to get around and get people to feel like they belong? And really, I'm looking for folks that maybe have a different perspective than I do on it. So what can we do to make ourselves more inclusive?
I would say when we're making decisions, making sure that we're talking to representatives from the groups that are going to be involved in the decision, the groups that are going to feel the effects of the choice that's made, just making sure we're talking to all involved.
Okay, maybe get more inputs, more diverse audience. What else?
Showing that each member has value to that team.
Every member has value to that team.
Everyone has value. They have input. They're a part of it.
Yep. What makes the military slightly different? What do we have structure? Rank structure. So how do we get more inclusive but still be respectful of rank? I know one thing for me personally, and I won't speak for Colonel Adams, but I know when I go out and I talk to soldiers, I don't get the right answer because I have more rank. You know, so I don't think I feel like I belong sometimes. Yeah, so you all need to be more inclusive for 06s. I'm outside that, what's that little, Colonel Adams and I are on that little bubble on the far right up there, that little segregation one.
I think, sir, to your point, though, I think that's the hard part about inclusion is that word called trust. So trust has to come into play. So soldiers aren't going to talk to us, higher level leaders, if they don't trust us. But there's no level of trust, in a sense.
Yeah, Career's back there smiling. I can see him smiling through his mask. What do you got? No points from your side. Okay. All right. What else? What else can we do to kind of become more inclusive? What do you need to do to become more inclusive? Yes.
Being honest with ourselves and realizing our own bias towards others.
Good. Maybe we've got some bias and we need to be honest about it. So how do we talk to people that we may have a difference or some sort of bias about? How can, say it, okay, I'm awkward and I can't talk to females. How do I talk to a female? How do I talk to an African American? I'm an old white guy. How do I talk to a Hispanic? I'm none of those. So what do I do?
Find commonality.
Find commonality. Good. How do you do that?
Open discussion. Where are you from? How old are you? How many kids do you have?
Yep.
Showing interest.
I don't know if you heard that. Open discussion. Show interest. Are those good things?
You find something in common with almost anybody at some level. I've found.
I also think too, it's approaching them in a way that's maybe not different than you would other people. The exception would be if you're talking to someone, that's deaf or blind, you can't approach them the same way. Well, just for us, with your female example, my first thought was approach them like you would anyone else. But I think a lot of it's necessary to the commonality.
Okay. Find things in common at. Anything else? Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the Sergeant Major of the Army had a good one that really stuck with me, and I've used it a few times, so I apologize, but, you know, how did you grow up? Simple question, get a different answer. You know, I've asked a few people that question particularly, and I got a really interesting story, you know, I didn't know. So just simple things like that. What else? Is there anything else that we can do to help people feel more like they belong?
I'd say just listening to others and not always having a response back to them. I think too often we like to sort of compare other people's upbringings and say, oh yeah, I had a similar situation just like that. I mean, just listening and not really always having something to sort of say back to them or try to one up them sometimes.
Okay, active listening. Yeah, I suck at that. It's on my to-do list.
And listening to understand and not listening to respond, because we are all probably guilty of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, you know, from my perspective, I feel like I've got a lot of experience, and you know, sometimes I just want to share that experience, but that's not necessarily what the other person wants. So, how do you cut somebody off like that? I'm asking for a friend. Okay, I'll Google it. All right, next slide. I want to see if this video works. Sanders, I think it's, if you escape out of there, it may have queued up by now, and the sound's off on it. So I went on, and this isn't a diversity one, but it's more of a cognitive thinking video. It's a TED Talk. We'll see if it comes up, but basically it's about groups. And actually they did a study, and they're you know, there's always doing studies and things like that on these topics but it's basically getting to the root of like adding more people into the discussion. You're going to tend to get a better solution to your problem. So hold on one second. Let me see if I can get that done.
So pinwheel of death, sir.
All right, so we didn't pay the internet bill, so we'll skip that. Might cut some time off it. I recommend, though, if you're really interested, go out, check out some of the information on TED Talks, just to get a different perspective. All right, so this is probably going to be a little bit short for you guys, which I'm sure you're not going to complain about, but if we go back to slide deck and go to the next slide. Len, you might have to help him out there.
You picked the wrong person, sir.
Okay, it's the slideshow. All right. All right. Yeah, if you could just go to the next slide. So basically what I wanted to talk about briefly is just, you know, so the opposite of belonging is not feeling like you're getting in the picture, and maybe that's because you're being discriminated against, or maybe you have soldiers too. So the so what of this one basically is, you know, this is the Army definition of what discrimination is, and I just think you need to take a look at that, because the next thing we're going to talk about is the topic of, you know, if you actually feel like you're being discriminated against, or you have a soldier that wants to file a discrimination complaint, we're going to talk about briefly that process, okay, so that you have a better understanding. But, you know, in general, you know, discrimination is basically leaving somebody out based on, maybe it's your bias against their race, religion, national origin, age, physical or mental disability, or some other, you know, aspect that you're basically leaving them out, and they feel like they're being discriminated against. So, you know, and there's a number of acts and things. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add? Has anybody seen this? And I'm not asking you to self-admit, you know, you've been discriminated, but if you want to share, like, what your experience is and how that's made you feel. Okay, I'll share mine then. How about that? I feel like I've been discriminated at work because I'm a white male and I work with mostly all females. And I know for promotion opportunities, I've been looked over for that. So I believe that's a form of discrimination. Now, it could just be my perspective on it, but I also am aware of some of the things that have gone around. Has anybody feel like they've been discriminated because they're a soldier. And maybe they, especially going back to the job market, and haven't been, those are examples of this. Yeah. You want to share? Or?
Well, so, for the most part, my employer, I think most of us have experienced some form of just offhanded comments from bosses saying, if I had known the amount of time you'd be gone, I would never have hired someone in the reserve. Just comments like that I think almost all of us at some point have experienced.
Yeah. I mean, I guarantee you've all probably felt discrimination in a certain form or fashion at some point. And maybe not to the extent that some others have. And there certainly are some pretty significant problems that have been, brought up recently. But, I think if you think about your own situation, maybe people that have been discriminated, maybe you've discriminated against somebody. So, I mean, it's just something it goes back to, I think, what Captain Blumke said. You gotta be self-aware of what your beliefs are, and try to work towards not having that limitation, so that you can then get to the point of inclusion and belonging. So, okay, next slide. So I just had a few questions here, just briefly. We already talked through a lot of these. How do we make our organization? Because we already talked about some things there. How do you change your bias? A lot of this is self-conversation, self-identification. Actually sitting down and thinking about it. How do we talk to those respectfully without acting like a clueless idiot or a bigot? I think we had some good examples of what we can do about that. And then how do we identify exclusive behavior and reduce it? We didn't really talk about that one, but how do we identify behavior or situations that look exclusive, and how do we address that? Model inclusive behavior. Good.
You see exclusive behavior in the ranks, address it as a leader.
Okay. If you see exclusive behavior, what does, one of my concerns as a leader, if I see people off on their own, consistently, what could that potentially be? Or depression. Yeah. Or it could lead to what? Yeah, so I think this all ties in together. It's being self-aware, and then also being aware of those around us that might be going through problems, right? I happen to be a mega introvert, so I don't do a whole lot outside this. So if you see me off on my own, it's probably because it's self-imposed. But you never know. Somebody might be going through something and just need help, and maybe they feel like they've been excluded, or maybe they just don't feel like they belong. So bringing them in, scooping them into the group, and then trying to include them. Okay, I won't belabor it. Let's go to the next slide. Sergeant Lewis, I think you're up.
How's it going? I'm Master Sergeant Lewis. I'm the EOA for Brigade. Really quickly, just kind of going to go over the EO complaints, what the complaint process is, and that piece of it. So, next slide. Okay, there's a lot of stuff up there, but in the end, an EO complaint is an allegation of unlawful discrimination or harassment based on the 6 bases of discrimination, either orally or in writing. The 6 bases of discrimination are written up there: race discrimination, color discrimination, sex discrimination, to include gender identity, religious discrimination, national origin discrimination, and sexual orientation discrimination. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. I'm not going to go all the way down into every word that's up there. All of it is out on the RCE SharePoint. There's an EO tab, and it has everything laid out there for you. Next slide. So there's 3 types of complaints that can be filed. There's an anonymous complaint, a formal complaint, and an informal complaint. Biggest difference is an anonymous complaint is a complaint that's received. The commander is actually the complainant on those complaints. The complainant is not identified, and it only goes forward if there is enough information for the commander to process through the entire complaint process. A formal complaint is done in writing on the DA Form 7279 and is sworn to the accuracy of the information. Formal complaints cannot be received by the EOLs, so the Equal Opportunity Leaders. The only one that's in RCs that can accept a formal complaint is myself. So if you have a complaint and you go to an EOL, they will refer you over to myself. Informal complaints are just any complaint that the complainant doesn't wish to file in writing. 90% of informal complaints are resolved with a mediated discussion with the complainant and the perpetrator. Bad choice of words. Perpetrator is probably not the right one. All complaints are kept on file for 15 years from the date of the complaint. It compiles and can also be used as a larger picture process later. So, and next slide is the breakout of how it all lays out time-wise. Big takeaway, they're not resolved very quickly. It's 60 days from the date of the initial issue, you can file a complaint. Anything after that, then that is not a valid complaint anymore past that 60 days. Complaint gets referred to the commander within 3 days. Commander starts the investigation within 5 days. And the investigation will be complete 30 days after being received by the commander. Once the investigation is complete, it goes through a legal review, notification for a final decision within 14 days. And then if it's appealed, it adds the additional 7 days for the appeal process, 3 days for the appellate authority, and the review will provide results within 14 days of receipt. The EOA will conduct a follow-up assessment 30 days after the final decision, and the commander it'll be presented to the commander within 5 days. The end state, it can take up to 171 days, and that is the active duty side. On the National Guard side, that does get stretched farther because it bases out through MUTAs. And so it's a very long process if you go to a formal complaint. Like I said, most complaints do get resolved much faster through the informal process. Informal process complaints are typically about 60 days and all the complaints are finalized. And that is really all I have for the complaint process.
All right, any questions on the complaint process? Pretty dry stuff, but I wanted to share that with you so that you know what the process looks like. And I thought, the whole process can take 171 days. Anything that hits Major Smith's desk takes at least 171 days.
Just add 30.
Okay. All right, that's a joke. And so a lot of things that go through the process can take a long time, and just like anything, I think it's a lot about communication and resolution. And I should, I'll go back to, my previous statement about my work. I probably felt discriminated against, but most likely it wasn't discrimination. I just wanted to use that as an example because I do work with like 75% females, and I'm the veteran guy, that's on the team. But so my perception might be that, but I've never had the opportunity to really sit down and think if it probably doesn't equate to the formal process because it's my perception, right? That's my self-talk and my internal dialogue going there. So, all right. So that pretty much wrapped up the diversity, equity, inclusion. Anything else we want to add to this process? It's all about dignity and respect, though.
One thing I'd like to add that just hit me about what you said. You said you work with 75% females, and that causes you to feel like you are being discriminated against, right?
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially. I'm just talking about feelings and perceptions here, but I think the DOD column had 18% females.
Yep.
Which is even less than the implication of 25% males in your workplace.
Right.
So, males in the room, maybe think about how females might feel.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I said, that's a good it was my perception, but if I turn it around and think about other situations, then I can put myself into that lens of, maybe there's other people that are probably being more feeling left out than others, just because it's demographics, it's data. Okay, I don't really have a homework assignment for this one other than, you got to do some self-study, and I do have a request. If anybody'd like to help, we've got an LDP topic coming up on emotional intelligence, which would be a good one, and I could use some help with that because I am emotionally dumb. So, need some intelligence, but come see me afterwards, and we'll get that one. But like I said, this is a series on dignity and respect, and it's all about you guys, perception, brain, thinking, tying it together, and then making some changes to make this organization better. So, but you got to take a look at it. Here's some resources. We'll get the slide deck out. The one thing last note I'll have is the Army Command Policy actually has the information about equal opportunity in it. If you got questions about that. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.